Today we're talking GA4 reports. So as you guys know, Google Analytics 4 is rolling out. The deadline to fully migrate is July 2023. And as we're setting up our new GA4 instance, one of the things that we found a lot of folks are struggling with is how does reporting work in GA4, right? It's a whole new interface. There's a whole new set of bells and whistles we have to play with. So how do we leverage reports in GA4 effectively, and how does it work? And what's exciting about GA4 is the reports are actually really cool. And to help us with this, we have a guest who is an analytics wizard. He is an SEO master. He is a CRO master. And he's going to take us through how we can actually use GA4, boots on the ground, practically to report. And Adam Roth is the perfect person to do that. So welcome to the—
Yeah, Adam Roth is an absolute badass. So he knows GA4 stone cold. He's also a CRO. He's also an SEO. He's a unicorn type of a person. So I'm happy and grateful just to be on the line with him. Like, I'll listen to whatever Adam Roth has to say as long as he has to say it. I want to give you guys just a little bit of color really quickly before we go into this. This is kind of a big deal. We rely heavily on Google Analytics right now with like literally every client. The first thing we do is we get into their Google Analytics. Most of them are a shit show, and we usually have to configure the goals and the events and everything and all the tracking. So and we've been doing that ever since we started, in 2009. So we're super duper duper familiar with Google Analytics, the old version. It was just a way of life really for us. And now that's going away. So that's a big deal. So we're like actively trying to migrate our own clients. We have 75 active clients right now. So we're trying to migrate our own clients with a sense of urgency. And the clients, some of them are like, yeah, let's do it. And others are like, we use Marketo or Pardot or HubSpot or Eloqua or whatever it is. But it is a big deal for us as an agency. So we're basically trying to help our clients get there. We've learned a lot in the process, and we're here to share it with you for free, just to be awesome, in hopes that you will appreciate it and have some value from it. So I do want you to talk. I want you to ask questions as they come up. And without further ado, let's get going.
Yeah, let's roll up our sleeves. So this is going to be a hands-on in the platform session where we're actually going to screen share and actually show you guys some of the features in GA4. So Adam, I guess to start things off, could you just give us maybe a quick tour of the GA4 reporting interface?
Happy to do so. So we're going to keep this very interactive. We're talking about Google Analytics. It's a reporting interface. And I don't think me sitting here, you guys looking at my face only, it's going to be helpful. We're going to look at the good, bad, and the ugly. So I'm going to actually build some reports live for you guys. We'll start off with just giving a basic tour of the interface. And I think I'll state first the most important thing you're going to hear today. I like GA4 more than I like Universal Analytics.
Oh, that's a big statement.
Spicy take.
Yeah.
That's a spicy take.
I hear the biggest reason that people are transitioning is because you have to. And I'm transitioning personally as director of optimization because it helps me optimize better than Universal Analytics. And my goal today is to hopefully get you guys to that point as well. So let me share my screen. Can you guys see that?
Got it.
Cool. So this is Universal Analytics, and today we're going to be using the test account. This is the Google Merchandise Center. We can go back and forth between Universal Analytics and GA4 for Google Merchandise Center. The most important thing that you're going to see here in Universal Analytics is that Universal Analytics isn't going to work much longer. So if you haven't transitioned over as of now, you already won't be able to see your data from a year ago, starting July 1st. So if you transition today, you could see year-over-year data starting in 365 days.
Yeah, meaning it will no longer process. So come July 2nd, you're not going to get any new data.
Right. So that
you can still finagle the old data for a little while longer.
Exactly. So I recommend at least implementing, at a minimum, at least implement your GA4. You can run them concurrently. So this is, of course, Universal Analytics. And I just want to open this up so we all remember what it looks like on the sidebar here. Real-time audience acquisition behavior conversions. And now we're going to make the big jump into GA4. Not that much different. It's pretty much the same thing. So the first thing that I want to do is just take you guys really quickly through this so you get an idea of what's important and what you need to look at and what you don't need to look at. There are two tabs as far as reporting that I care about almost at all. Reports and Explore. Reports is where you're going to see most of your pre-populated reports like you're used to in Universal Analytics. And then Explore is just a custom tool where you can custom build a whole bunch of different reports. We're going to get to Explore in a second. I'm actually going to build every single visualization I want to show you one example of. So I can show you how useful this data is, and it's not just some pretty thing, and it's not difficult to do. Outside of that, we have some semi-useful tabs. Home is just a wrap-up of what they think are important reports. Advertising, you can see your attribution models there. Configure is mostly for developers. You can change your goals to events and events to goals. You can also set up audiences. And then we have the admin section, which once you go there, it looks pretty much similar to Universal Analytics. There are some big changes as far as how the data works, and we'll get into that. But that's really it. Let me just click into the Explore tool on the report so you're used to seeing that before I go into exact examples. In reports, we get a second menu.
So Adam, real quick. So I'm kind of the belief that this is like a big, sweeping change. Are you of the belief that there's like more similar than there is different?
It's everything that existed in Universal Analytics exists in GA4 that's necessary for us as marketers to make the companies we work for more money.
Okay.
The only thing that's added on is the ability to like dive deeper in the data and the Explore tool.
So it's an upgrade. It's like a legit upgrade.
It's definitely an upgrade. The sweeping changes that we hear about are all on the development end. So I'm only worried about how can I use this as a marketer right now. I'll let the developers handle the development. They're all getting confused, and it's different to implement the way that the events work, etc. Once our developers implement GA4 for our customers, all I have to worry about is how do I use this data to report? And it's almost the same, it's just better.
Love it. I love your perspective on that. Thank you. Keep going.
Yeah. So when I click down in the reports tab, the first thing that everybody says is, where'd all the reports go? There's just far fewer pre-populated reports that you can access directly from the menu. And so once we realize that, we think that Google Analytics 4 is missing a bunch of reports, and that's just not the case. The case here is that the organization's a little bit different. If you don't see something here that you're looking for, you can also go into the Explore tool and build it. I'm going to show you that for a second. And here we have explorations. If you guys have seen Data Studio, from this page, it looks a lot like Data Studio. When you're thinking about what exploration to use, just think about your data type, think about the answer that you want, and work backwards. So if I'm looking for how many of my users who come in on mobile come back on desktop, I know that I need a segment overlap, and so I would go there. You can imagine the visualization you want to see. It's not any more complicated than that. If I'm looking for users who landed on this page, I want to know where they go to next. You know that can't be shown in a chart. It's going to be a path exploration. You want to see the line from one page to the next. If you want to see your drop-off rates, you go to your funnel exploration. Here's users that landed. Here's users that made it to my category page or the product page, users that added to cart, the whole way to purchase.
Adam, quick question from Ben. So just to clarify, the tags on websites for UA will not work on GA4.
Correct.
Yep.
It will not work. The data is collected differently. You will need a completely new setup. I'll show you actually just very quickly how, if you don't have a really complex setup, I'll show you there's a tool that's included in GA4 to transfer really quickly.
Yeah, and Adam, I think it's fairly safe to assume. I mean, I think it's fairly safe to assume that most of the setups are fairly basic. And the reason that I say that is because even when we get clients that are pretty advanced, their Google Analytics setup usually is underwhelming.
Potentially. You can always try Setup Assistant. If Setup Assistant doesn't work, you likely need a dev. This is something that, this is a thing that we offer as well, and we've done for most of our clients. You can try, let me go back to Universal Analytics. To get to the Setup Assistant, to see if you have an easy setup, you go to Admin, and then GA4 Setup Assistant. And you can do, so this is obviously for the Google Merchandise Center, so I don't have access to this. But right here, they tried to build a tool that will walk you through setting up GA4. For most of our clients, this doesn't work because we use our analytics in a way where we want to capture custom events. And the second that you have custom events, you're going to need a custom setup.
Yeah, an event is something like this person was interested. Like they scrolled down this page, they viewed this video, like that's a high quality event. Real quick, show of hands in the chat. What is your single source of truth? Or maybe you have multiple sources of truth. What platforms do you use to report or to, yeah, basically to report? I know it's probably some combination of things. Drop it in the chat. What are you using right now? Like, are you 100% Google Analytics? Are you Google Analytics, HubSpot, Salesforce? Drop in the chat what you are using to report as your single source of truth.
I'm interested too if it's Data Studio, and I'm interested especially if it's Adobe Analytics. I've been seeing that more and more.
Got HubSpot. We've got Google Data Studio with integrations with native apps, Salesforce, HubSpot, GA4, GA4 Mixpanel, UA with a little Data Studio, Google Data Studio. Okay, sounds like a mix.
So there's some significant reliance, but I do find like some of our clients like don't really care about Google Analytics. They're mostly like they're in HubSpot and they're happy with that. I love HubSpot and I love Salesforce and I love all these different things. I love Google Analytics because it gives you granularity. Like it gives you that deeper level of granularity where like you could say, hey, I want to run ads to this landing page with a video and I want to retarget to 50% video viewers. And I want to build that audience and activate it in Google Ads and in YouTube. Like that's why I like Google Analytics because of that granularity and because of the activation potential, the way that you can activate those audiences, especially on Google and YouTube. And I know you can do that to some extent on HubSpot and with Salesforce, but I feel like it's deeper with Google Analytics, which is why I'm not ready yet to and this is our single source of truth usually.
Yes.
Like when we're talking about traffic generating campaigns or lead generating campaigns, we're usually like heavily seated in Google Analytics data.
If you can get your analytics instance, your Google Analytics instance to a place where you trust that the data is piping in correctly, for me, this is always the go-to. I haven't found a better reporting tool.
All right.
So we want to talk about some differences between GA4 and UA before we get into the reports I find most useful.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Well, yes, let's do that.
The most important thing is there's not much, but the biggest is what I want to show you is the organization. So we talked about how there's fewer pre-populated reports that show up from the menu structure. what's really important here is some of the reports are hidden. So I would recommend, I'm going to open a couple of these. If you see under acquisition, there's acquisition overview, and under engagement, there's overview. And under monetization, there's overview. I recommend clicking into these if you're looking for a report that was typically under acquisition. And you'll see these cards that open up. Some of these cards open up into reports that in universal analytics we would have expected to see in the menu structure. So it's probably the most common mistake that I see made in GA4 is the assumption that these reports don't exist. I would recommend going in under engagement, looking at overview, and again, you'll see these cards. I'm going to click into one of these so you can see it's the whole report. This is the event report that you used to see before. In this case, it is linked below, so it just highlighted that tab. I would think there's probably 50% more pre-populated reports than you'd expect just looking at this menu. It's something to be really careful of.
So like, what about like one of my key reports would be the traffic report, like traffic by source and medium. Is that?
There's a difference there as well. So the first thing that I would do is go to acquisition here. And this is again a little confusing for some newer users. You see the same report twice here: user acquisition and traffic acquisition. It's because we're reporting on the numbers in two different ways. So I'll click the traffic acquisition. And just as you would expect, you see your channel groupings here. You can also change the grouping above, just like you would expect if you just want to see medium, source platform, or campaign. Under user acquisition, the chart looks the same, but the numbers are different. This is a really important, it's a really great point as to why GA4, or I think GA4 is better. Under user acquisition, we're only adding numbers under each of these columns by users' first channel grouping that they came in on. So if a user came in on organic search and they came back through paid search and then again through display, we're only ticking the boxes for organic search throughout their entire journey. Under traffic acquisition, we're not worried about a user individually. We only want to report by traffic source. These numbers will always be higher. So let's take a look. Right now we're under traffic acquisition. For organic search, we have 1,066. We're going to click into user acquisition, and for organic search, we have 952. That's because if we're looking by a user, they'll come back through some of those users will come back through multiple channels, but we're only counting them once in the user acquisition report. So
yeah, just to note that I'm personally embarrassed by how small those numbers are. So if you're on this call and you're still listening, do me a favor, Google WebMechanix by name and just click on the first result so our numbers can go up.
This is only for a few days. And I do think it's important to note, just like Universal Analytics, this report is they kept the interface, at least visually, the same. So it's kind of obvious. You have your menu over here, admin here. You can change properties up top. And just like we were talking about now, you can change your date range here. And it looks very similar as it did in UA.
Okay. So is that to say that basically the reports that we're used to still do exist? Let me ask the audience a question. What reports do you rely on? What reports do you love in Google Analytics Universal that you're not seeing in GA4? Or what reports do you really, really, really hope exist? UTM reporting, says Jim.
Interesting. And that's an interesting one.
Anybody else? Are there any, well, UTM reporting, I imagine would be in the traffic sources, right? Because you'd have a UTM medium equals this, UTM source equals that.
Yes.
Yeah, if you
Yeah,
go to first
campaign
user
will
default
click.
channel grouping and drop down, you can pull out those UTM parameters.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go. Let me see if I can bring up. Just give me a second. I'm going to try and bring up Google Merchandise Center. Reports.
Behavior, site content, all pages, says Tim Jones.
So there's a couple ways that you could go about UTM reporting. The first would be to configure it so that your UTM, so that your instance diverts the UTMs into a certain source medium. I heard someone say there's potential under the secondaries for under first user medium. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mm,
Yeah, if you drop down into there, you can do first user source medium.
First user source medium, and you should see your UTMs here. The other way to do this, if you have very, very specific UTMs, would be to use the Explore tool. And in the Explore tool, you can create a set of filters and filter out the exact UTMs that you're looking for. And we'll get into the Explore tool in a second. It's almost a completely separate interface. I showed it briefly, but we'll go through some specifics there. And if we have time, like how to use filters, stuff like that.
So hey Adam, so I noticed here, so this is the GA4 demo account. I noticed that their tabs look a little bit different. So when in our GA4 accounts, are we able to build tabs? Like, are we able to build our own tabs inside of the?
Yeah, you can change these on the left. What I find, and what you're basically changing them to, is you can add, if you want to by default see one of these secondary drop downs, you can add it on the left. I recommend that for really high level users who, you know, I've seen business owners who they just want to keep their Google Analytics up and see the e-com customers coming in. I recommend it for that. You can also underneath report snapshot, you can decide which reports you want to see here. So you basically have one specific dashboard that you can add or remove reports from that you think are the most important of these other reports. And that way, you know, it can make it really easy to hop into the user acquisition report, the traffic acquisition.
Nice. That's perfect. That's perfect. So that's what you need right there. That report snapshot. So all of your most important reports need to live in that report snapshot, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, especially if you're constantly checking your numbers and you just want to go in, you know what reports you use all the time. I know for me in Universal Analytics, I had exact reports that I used to go to all the time, and it'd be really cool if I could just have them on a dashboard. And you could there. It was a little bit more finicky than this report snapshot. But importantly, I find myself always almost exclusively going to the Explore tool in GA4.
Now, guys, I want to point something out here. On the far right of the screen, you see Insights. So Insights is the AI, the ML, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence that Google is hot on, and they're very, very, very well positioned to do that because they have so much dang data on the users. And so I would not ignore those tabs. Like if you click into view all insights, like I would not ignore those. I would not accept them blindly, but I would look closely at them for insights because those are machine-driven insights. Even the best agencies in the world with the best data scientists in the world, they still don't have access to all of the data sets that Google has access to. So I'm always paying close attention to these insights. Usually I dismiss them. Usually I'm like, no, that makes no sense to bid more on this campaign with this keyword. But don't. And that's one of the things that I think is really, really cool about GA4 is this. And why I urge everybody to install it immediately, basically, because of these level of insights. Even if you don't configure it, even if you don't set it up immediately, just installing it gets you these insights. And some of them are good, basically. Most of them are irrelevant, but some of them are good.
I find them highly useful. They did so this is a little different from UA. We had insights before. They're heavily using machine learning in GA4, and they're marketing it to an extent where they're stating we're going to continue to add features that use machine learning. This is one that I found really useful, especially in comparison to universal analytics, because it doesn't just say what the insight is. It describes why they're saying it's an insight, and then gives you a graph that shows you the data that they use to determine that this insight was an actual anomaly. You can see it says right here, when there's an open circle, that's when you hit anomaly, and you just hit anomaly at this date range. Really important. They're also using machine learning in 2 other ways currently that I'm aware of, and they're stating there's going to be more. The first is you have an option to use the data model of cross-channel data-driven. What that means is, rather than first touch, we're always going to attribute the conversion to the first place we got this user. That's generally what we saw in universal analytics. You have the option to allow Google to use their predictive algorithms to take that single conversion up and divide it into pieces by how much they thought each channel affected that user's chance to convert. So you'll actually see decimals in your conversions.
That's huge. Yeah, so most of you guys right now, and feel free to drop a chat, are you using first touch attribution, last touch attribution, blended attribution models? I mean, you could argue one way or the other. Most of the largest advertisers that I see use some sort of a blended model. Data-driven attribution is something that's now live in Google Ads. Google Ads now supports data-driven attribution, even if you don't have Search Ads 360, which costs a lot of money. Even if you're just using the regular Google Ads, you can choose data-driven attribution, which gives partial credits to all of the different touch points throughout the journey.
Yep.
I'm curious from the crowd here, how do you guys model conversions? First touch, last touch, blended, something else?
Yeah, I may have said first touch was the default for UA. It's last touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
It says last click.
Yeah, last click.
So that's, and that's a big, like, we could have a whole session just about attribution models, because there's a big little uprising happening right now saying that, hey, these attribution models that we're using are killing creativity. Because if you're using a last click attribution model and you're not that means basically you're not giving any credit to the first touches, right? Which is what brought them in the first place. So for instance, if anybody on this call comes to become a client of WebMechanix at some point, and some of you I know already are clients, but if anybody comes to become a client and it was because of this, and we were using a last click attribution model, this would get no credit, and this is doing all the work. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So blended attribution is the answer, and most people know this already, but there's no easy way to do it. And so data-driven attribution is what Google calls it, and that's kind of the easy way to do it.
That is what we default to for our account.
Tajit says for now last click, but we're building out U or W-shaped attribution reporting in Visible.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And that'll work. But you have to give credit to the different touch points. I mean, especially in a long sales cycle situation. If you're selling like custom t-shirts that cost $5 each, like maybe not. But if you're selling something that's expensive, that takes multiple sessions, multiple users, or multiple buying influences, like it really doesn't make sense to look purely at first touch or last touch. You could look at first touch and last touch, right? And compare them. But your best bet is to use data-driven attribution.
So if I go to advertising here, we do have our model comparison tool. It's a little hidden. just like before. You can see each attribution model. And then I also want to show you guys how easy it would be to change. So by default, reports in Universal Analytics and in GA4 have one data model, and they're reporting under that. If you want to change that in GA4, you go to admin. You go somewhere around here. Oh, I might not be able to do it in the because I'm into this GA4 account. Let me find our account. WebMechanix, admin.
Well, you can just tell us. So you go to data collection and then
Attribution settings, and you can change. It's that simple. You can change it and you can change it back. So some of these things, because Google doesn't want to give it, I'm trying to stay in the Google Merchandise Center account, but we're a little bit restricted there. We're not admins.
So Adam, I'm curious, what would it look like to build a report live in GA? So maybe taking Tim's example of behavior, site content, all pages, how would we replicate that in Google Analytics 4?
Let's do that. The first, what I'll do is I'll show you where that is in reports. Then let's start to get in. I promised everybody cool reports in the Explore tool. So then let's start to build some there. I'd like to show you an example in each data visualization if possible. So we'll start.
I appreciate that, Adam. I appreciate your desire to fulfill your promises. That's
so let's look at where we can find that here first. If you go under engagement, Tim, pages and screens. Again, one of the changes is just called something different. We have a cool new visualization here. We have users and views. And here's your pages. If you want to change, if you want to see the URL, you can do that. Just go to page path. If you've created custom content groups, you can also do that. But let's go to page path so it looks exactly like your site content, all pages. And here you go. You can see the page and the views. Also notice on the right, no bounce rate. Bounce rate is not a metric. As of now, Google, as of last week, stated they're going to add it in. GA4 is changing all the time, and users would, it turns out, gave some feedback there. They want to see bounce rate, but I actually like engagement. Engagement is how many users engage. It's the positive version of bounce rate. Bounce rate was the negative, how many are leaving. What we're interested in is what did the users who engaged do? Because then we can replicate that experience for other users and optimize our website for conversions.
wow. Yeah, so average time on page, is that average time on page basically? Or because it used to be, if you had a page that was like 99% bounce rate, average time on page would be 0.
So another important thing, they hid the tooltips. You don't see the icon, but when you hover over now, you can see the explanation. This is why developers find it difficult and why you need a separate install for GA4. The data is saved differently. So in this case, the engagement time is importantly when the app was in the foreground or the user was actually looking and engaging with the page by moving.
Interesting.
Yeah. That some of these metrics are very slightly different. Bounce rate, bounce rate used to be based on the amount of time that, so say if it was on screen for a certain amount of time, or if a user didn't scroll and immediately left, was a bounce. The metrics are slightly different, but what I'm finding for marketing purposes is it's the same thing as we think of essentially. It's just not, the data won't line up perfectly with Universal Analytics because they're fine tuning in the definitions of the metrics.
Makes sense. A couple of questions came in from the audience. Ishmael asks, how can I export data report to present to clients about our performance here in GA4?
That's a can of worms right there.
Yeah, so you can always share. Now, these features are ever changing. Since I started in GA4, it looks completely different in the previous 3 months. So right now you can share the report exactly. You can copy the URL and share that via Access. There's no export feature currently. You can connect to Data Studio. So if you want to share it in Data Studio, you can do it that way. I would expect an export feature to be made available eventually. I haven't heard anything about it though.
But I think export to Data Studio and share that would probably be the most viable option.
That's our preference. That is what we do.
And then Ben asks, with the scare of a cookieless future on the horizon, isn't the concept of first and last attribution dying too?
That's a tough one. It hasn't yet died. There are still cookies on websites that track, and we can still trust our tracking. In the future, far in the future, not sure where that will go. But as of now, the laws allow it, and of course, the implementations that we push forward allow us to continue to track.
So I have it on fairly good confidence that like Google's probably not killing third-party cookies when they say that they will. It'll probably be delayed again. But first-party cookies still work. So there's nothing that prevents you from planting a first-party cookie like within the user's browser the first time they visit, and planting another cookie the second time they visit, and the third time they visit, and the fourth time they visit, and the fifth and the sixth. And so I think that there'll be a lot more room for creativity when it comes to attribution on a first party basis. But I also think that Google's bluffing a little bit. I don't think that third party cookies will go away.
Right.
Maybe they will eventually. And some browsers already prevent them like pretty aggressively. Like Safari is pretty aggressive with it. So like, I don't know. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it, but that's a great point though, Ben. In theory, if the laws went through and Google stuck to a very strict application of those laws, it's possible that first and last attribution might go away. Analytics would still be useful as far as tracking people on your site. It would just be where did they come from that time. Potentially that's why they split up these acquisition reports, right? Now we can see user versus traffic acquisition. If you're one of those who doesn't trust third-party cookies, then you can just look very specifically at traffic acquisition. So you're only judging by the channels they came from and not the user journey themselves.
Makes sense. So Adam, I know you've been dying to show us the Explore tool and really dive into that. So walk us through, what can we do in the Explore tool and how does it impact our reporting?
Well, since you asked, Jared. So
Quick time check. We have like 15 minutes left roughly.
Okay, we'll go through them quick. You want me to spend
Time flies at the growth clinic, people.
You want me to spend like 5 or 10 minutes on this, or should I leave more time for questions?
Go for it. And if anyone has questions, drop them in the chat, or if there are any reports you'd like us to build live in the last 15 minutes here, let us know and we'll put it at the top of the queue.
So we walked through each of the explorations. You can see them here. I go to this tool first. I find myself going to this tool because you can build any report you want, or any data that you need, you can find in this tool. Let's start with freeform. We talked about viewing by page. I want to show you how easy it is to use these charts. Here you just have a list of the data you want to see. And then you have a list of how you want to see the data. So you can just change the settings. The first thing I do when I go into one of these is I tend to just take the data out of the chart and start over. What we had talked about was let's look at landing pages by user. So how many users came to each landing page? I want to show you how easy that is to build. The first thing I need to do is find landing page here so that I can add it. And since I don't see it, I need to go into the expanded menu. So I'm just going to hit the plus. And you can search for it. I'm going to check that and click import. All that does is it adds it to my available list so that if I want to, I can add it to the chart. I'm just going to double click landing page. The next thing is I wanted landing page by users. So I'm just going to look for users down here. We have active users. There's many forms of users. I like active users. So just double click that.
So very quickly, guys, if you're like me and you're confused a little bit about dimensions versus metrics, just remember metrics are measured in numbers. Dimensions are usually words.
What I really like about this tool is that you actually don't even need to know the difference. You just need to find the things you want. And then you can actually drag and drop to add. But if you just double click, it tends to actually just make the report you want, which I think is beautiful. It's so much simpler than it would appear.
I love that you love GA4 because there's so many haters out there that are like, why?
Yeah, I think it's just because it's like, why do you need to change? Like, we like what we had. I love it. I find it so much more useful for my day-to-day job. And that's kind of what this meeting is about. How do we use it to report? And I try to like avoid, I mean, we're going to have to use it anyway, so I try to avoid complaining about it. So if you want to see more than 10 rows, I just talked about the settings here. You can just change the settings. Here's 25, 50 rows, done. And you have your report. Now, this is where GA4 goes one step further. You can now go, you can break this down. You can break this data down even further. Where in Universal Analytics, you were stuck to this pre-populated report, woohoo, we created it here. Let's say you want to go one step further and you want to understand what devices came in on an individual page. Again, I'm just going to double click devices. And you can see device category by landing page by users. And if this is confusing for you, you can instead put devices will make the pages show up multiple times on the left. You can see our homepage by desktop, homepage by mobile. You can
So Adam, how would I add more columns? If you go back before you did the device breakdown, like say I just wanted to have more columns, like I wanted to have time on page, I wanted to have average pages per session.
So what I just did here is I just drug device category down to columns, and you can see now the chart's a little easier.
Yeah.
If you wanted if you wanted to add any other dimension, you can always go in, find them under the dimensions. We'll just use one that's pre-populated. Let's say we wanted country. You can add it under category.
I also have a question once you're finished this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you know how to clean the data to get those query parameters out of the path? In the old one, it's super easy to do at the view settings, but I just don't see the settings here.
That's how you would do it. So there's two ways you can do it. The first is you can actually create a segment, and there's tons of filters here. So when you do a user segment, you can actually you can actually have URL does not contain query parameters. But there's some implications there.
Yeah, it's going to exclude anything with a query parameter, right?
So you would actually need to, if you don't want these parameters to populate, you'd have to do that in your setup. So that would be in the admin section.
Got you. Okay.
Yep. And I'm looking at, I might be skipping ahead here, but I'm looking at Tim's question. Does GA4 allow for mobile traffic filtering? Yes, it does. And I can do that right here live on this report. So let's go. I'm just going to make a simpler looking report because we added so many things there. So again, we just have landing pages by users. If I only want to see mobile traffic, there's a segment up here, and I can just make sure that this is only mobile. And now we have mobile versus total. It's what I love about GA4 is you can create the exact charts you need without these complications of drop downs and the need to make all these user groups and categories. And if you need a new segment, say I wanted a segment that was mobile and tablet, I could create it live right here only for this report. It doesn't have implications across my whole instance. I just would hit the plus button and create a user segment.
That's really cool. So, hey, is this bonus question, mobile by device?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
answer that question. I'm sure you can answer that question.
So I'll show you, I'll actually go into the create a custom segment. So once we do user segments, you have all of your options here, and we'll have to find it.
And that answers my question too. I was wondering what happened to advanced custom segments?
Yep.
Because I loved advanced custom segments because you could build the segment and then activate it as an audience for ads.
Yep. I think there's so much easier to do here. And just like you just said, if say, what did you say? By device, iPhone versus Android. So that would be,
Well, that's a report is one thing, but which device are you most interested in would be the question. Let's build an advanced custom segment with that device. Like, are you interested in an iPhone, OS version equals
10.5. So it would take me a second to do it here because you have to find exactly the wording. You can imagine you would include users when OS version equals Android and OS version equals iPhone, or whatever the section would be here. It would take a second to find it.
Operating system. Might be operating system, then iOS would do it.
There we go. iOS.
Oh, one of the weird things you gotta, yeah, you're probably gonna, you gotta
You
hit
can name
save.
this here as well.
I've been
But
looking
yeah.
into that too.
Word to the wise though, Google Analytics 4 is buggy. Like you see it, like it is quite buggy still. So I wouldn't necessarily move to it as your permanent or like as your main thing, but I would definitely get it set up. Real quick show of hands, show of chat, just a yes or no. Yes, if you already have GA4 installed. No, if you don't.
Priest says
Like
yes.
yes, if you just are basically collecting data. No, if you're not.
Yes.
And we got 20 some participants. I'm interested in getting 20 some answers here.
Developer resistance from Tim.
Developer resistance. Well, you better tell that developer to get with the time because it's coming, guys. It's coming. And I don't believe Google that third-party cookies are going away. I think it's next year too. But I do believe Google that Google Analytics Universal is going away.
Couple last questions that came in. Ismail asked, how can I connect J4 to Google Data Studio?
We use a platform like Supermetrics to do it right now. I believe there is a native integration for if you have simpler instances. We like to use an integrative platform. We use funnel.io because then our Data Studio reports can contain data from multiple reporting applications like HubSpot, for example, and from our analytics instance. There's a native integration in Data Studio for GA4, as far as I understand currently. I don't have more information on that because I don't currently use it.
Yeah, I know there's something else. What's Google SQL querying tool?
Yeah. So one thing that you can do is you can save all of your data from Universal Analytics in BigQuery. That way, because your ability to see your Universal Analytics data is eventually going to go away. And it's quite important to save it because if you don't have that back data, it'll go away. We're thinking in 2 years. You have about a year until Universal Analytics goes away. It'll be about a year and a half till you can't even see the data in Universal Analytics. How are you going to know if your business has been outperforming itself year over year, or if your business is tanking year over year without year over year data? It'll be speculatory. And you can imagine after employee churn, no one will know what happened during those years.
Yeah, so that's an amazing point. So Google Analytics, as we know, it stops collecting data around July 2023. That data will be, the pre-existing data will be available for probably another year or maybe 2 or whatever. But if you want or you need access to all that historic data, you need to download it all and basically set it up into BigQuery or some other data warehouse or something where you can query it and just build reports on your own as you need to.
And it seems like a hassle now, but imagine how much of a hassle it would be trying to figure out what's going on with your website.
For a lot of companies, it's not that important. You know, like for a newer company, for if the traffic's not that much, if it's just on the up and up, like maybe your early days data is not that important. So don't kill yourself over it. But like if there's some specific year or some specific time period that you really want to capture, make sure that you download that locally or in the cloud and set it up in such a way that you can query against it.
And EJ, I do want to point out, I think that's, you asked this, I did get Android versus iOS to populate.
Nice. Nice.
Barbara has her hand raised. Barbara, if you want to chime in. I have a question.
No, sorry, I think that was a mistake. Sorry.
No, you're good. No worries.
So Jared, we're right about at time here. We should probably close out. I want to be respectful to everyone's time.
Yep. So just to wrap up, guys. So we're going to have this recording live on our YouTube channel in the next 1 to 2 business days. Definitely subscribe, and you'll catch the recordings as they come out. So even if you can't make a session, you'll be able to at least catch the recording. Next week, we are actually away. We are on vacation next week, but we will be back in August, and you'll get an email with a preview of some of the topics we're going to be covering in the month ahead. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions about this, I'm going to drop about GA4 reports or otherwise, or need any help at all with your GA4, I'm going to drop my email in the chat here. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help. If you need, consulting or additional support, we're obviously available for that too. But yeah, hope this session was helpful for you guys. And let me know if you have any questions. We're here to help, and we'll see you guys on the next one.
Yeah, we got your back, guys. Lots of stuff is changing. We're going to be here to help you. Hit us up and come next week and bring your friends.